This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porque se cheated.
What was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take the Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today is Taylor Twellman. You know him very well. Obviously, Sounders fans, huge fans, Taylor.
Yeah, big fans of me. Big fans. Yeah, big fans. How are you guys?
Well, I'm great, and I'm always happy to have you on. I don't know, this is probably the fourth or fifth time probably at this point that we've had you on, but I love having you on, and I think Sounders fans just give you a hard time because they're so familiar with you.
Agreed.
They feel like it's a brother, kind of a sibling kind of thing.
First off, I love the fact that they give it back to me. I think one, it keeps me honest, and two, it shows the level of fandom. They're an educated fan base. I'm not saying others aren't, but there's a different level of education to be.
But not as much.
Right. That's a good point. That's a good point. No, never mind. I take back everything I just said. No, honestly, I do. I love it. I love everything about it. I especially loved this year when I did Portland beating Seattle because Seattle fans took a little offense to a couple of my thoughts.
I don't remember that happening, but I'll take your word for it. But you're not calling this week's game, I guess, or you're not calling the next game.
We were, Jake and I, Apple, I think MLS was hoping that there was real jeopardy on the line for Portland, Seattle. And I think that's why they scheduled it. I think that's why they looked into it. And the truth of the matter is the West kind of settled itself. Other than the host of the play-in game, it's kind of played itself out. And then obviously Messi and Miami can set the record. So you know where I'll be. Yeah,
the West is much more settled now. I mean, it's much more settled now than I think the Sounders can finish theoretically anywhere from second to fourth, but second to fourth is like the smallest variance in terms of what it means for you between. It's really because I think teams 5 through 7 are also pretty equally. There's not a big gap between the 5th best team and the 7th best team.
But I'm going to interrupt you. Whatever side avoids LAFC may be the best side for you guys.
Well, yes, that's been a common theme. We might as well start there. So that's been a common theme in Sounder circles is, would you rather finish as high on the table as possible, or would you rather avoid being on the same side of the bracket as LAFC? And if you're the Sounders, you don't bother worrying about that, right? Like, you as the team, you just want to win the games in front of you. But as a analyst, what do you think is more? Is it better to have home field advantage for as long as you can get it and theoretically have the better path, or is it just whatever you can do to avoid LAFC is the better path?
It's interesting the way you phrased it, because I would say both, but you always got to remember, you don't want to look back on decision day and then the Galaxy slip up before that and you could have been the second seed, right? So you don't want to lose home field advantage. However, LAFC have 2 games. Seattle only has 1. LAFC, if they beat Vancouver during the international break, that kind of makes the decision for you. LAFC could ultimately be the 1 seed. You don't know how that plays out. So I think Seattle's just got to look at it and say, we finish as high as we can. And at some point, you got to beat them, Jeremiah. So
I agree.
The ex-player, my thought is, hey, you know what? If we got to play him sooner rather than later, whatever, if we're going to go to MLS Cup, we're going to have to beat the Galaxy or LAFC. So we might as well do it now.
Yeah, and my thinking is that whether you're doing it in the whether you meet LAFC in the conference finals or the conference semifinals, it doesn't really feel any better to lose in either one of those rounds, because at the end of the day, the bar you're measuring yourself by at this point, if you're the Sounders, is can you hang with LAFC? And it's almost really that simple, right? Is this a team that you can stand toe to toe with? And I don't know, you can maybe argue that they stood toe to toe with them. Maybe not really, but no, I don't think that's the problem, right? The last 2-3 games that they've played each other, it's been a tough matchup.
Yep. It's been one where you've seen quality at a different level in the critical moments than someone on Seattle has done. Now, listen, I go back and I still hold Seattle to this, and I know CONCACAF Champions League final may come into play here, but 2019, that Western Conference final against LAFC, still, in my opinion, is the best game I've ever seen the Sounders play. And when you think about it, it was your 2 best players showed up and played the game of their lives. Ladero and Rui Diaz were brilliant on the day. Mm-hmm. Everyone else contributed. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they didn't play well. But when you play LAFC, I feel like Seattle fans will agree with me. It's often just, well, Bouanga's been better.
Right.
They got Bouanga. He's been better. They don't give up a ton of chances, but the quality in the final third, Bouanga's just better than anything that we've done. So that's the long-winded way of saying their quality's risen to the top a little bit more so. But I'm going to go to the next question that you have. I still think they can beat them. I still think Seattle has 1 run left in them. And I think it's 1 run. I think it's with this group. I don't know what it looks like. I think part of it is shootouts, winning in penalties. You know, I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe that, but I don't think it's impossible for Seattle to not make MLS Cup. I still think there's a run in them. I just don't think it's going to be the same run that we saw in 19, that we saw in 16, 17, whatever it may be. I think it's going to be a little different.
Yeah, and they were pretty, you know, they kind of made solid. Yeah, those were impressive. Like, they were not in doubt any of the results, really. Like,
agreed.
They looked good.
Even on the road against Colorado, I was in the building and called that game. They were definitively the better team that day.
Yeah, so they have this game against the Timbers, which I guess sort of puts the previous discussion a little bit to the side. They need to win this game for a host of reasons, not the least of which is that they haven't beaten the Timbers at home since 2017.
Which is unbelievable when I read that the other day. I almost had to double check
stat.
That's insane. Now, part of that, Savarese, the way he set up those teams, it almost worked to being on the road. I don't think Phil Neville's Timbers are built for that, especially on this game. And that's why, Jeremiah, I'm with you. What if they win 3-1? You know, what if Seattle has this outpouring of goals, definitive win against their rivals? That can very easily teach an old dog some tricks that all of a sudden gets going. I actually think the way they play and the result against Portland may have a lot to say of how Seattle does in the playoffs. I really do.
I do too. And they've, you know, it's funny because as good as they've been since, you know, you go back to June 15th, they're 12-2-2 in league play since then. That is setting up as one of the all-time great second halves of MLS history. And yet there hasn't been this air of invincibility around them at all. And that's a big part because of their stumbles against LAFC. And also one of those, their 2 losses in that time are LAFC and Portland.
Yeah.
And I think those are almost looming larger than the 12 wins that they have in that time, which is, you know, speaks a lot to the confidence of a group. And you look at, it's really only this last week that I started to feel in the fan base a real genuine confidence where they go and they win 3 games against playoff caliber opponents, 2 of them on the road, all of them where they were reasonably, they were pretty much in control in all 3 of those games, even though they won 2 of them 1-0.
Yes, I like the way you put that because, and I was talking about this over the weekend. Since July 1st, the 2 best teams in MLS are not Inter Miami, not Columbus, not LAFC, not the Galaxy. It's actually Orlando City and the Seattle Sounders.
Right.
And I found that interesting because then you got to dive into the weeds. Orlando City can hold their hat on, we've scored the most goals we've ever scored in a regular season. So they've hit some barometers they've never hit before. That's why they're on a run. When I look at the Seattle Sounders in the run that you just said, if you think about the wins that they've had, Dallas, Chicago, New England, at Austin, St. Louis City, at Minnesota, at Columbus, good win. Okay. Different.
Questionable circumstances, but yeah.
Absolutely. Sporting Kansas City. It wasn't until the last 2 at Vancouver, at Colorado, that all of a sudden I was like, okay, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
And that's what I said during the loss against Portland. I was like, wait a minute, guy. First off, you play the team in front of you. Absolutely. But I can't hold my hat on the Seattle Sounders of old and say this is the same one. When I look at this run that they've been on, I don't know, man. They lost to LAFC. They lost to Portland. They tied San Jose. And you sit there and go, no, at Colorado, at Vancouver, the 2 best victories, in my opinion, of that run. And that's all that matters. Those are the 2 most recent. So it doesn't matter what you did against Dallas in June and in July against Chicago, New England. It doesn't really matter, Jeremiah. You beat Colorado on the road. That's always a hard one. You beat Vancouver on the road. Now you got Portland at home. You win that 2-0, 3-1, a convincing win against the second highest scoring team of the West. Now all of a sudden you may be cooking with gas, and I think Brian Schmetzer knows that.
Yeah. You mentioned Brian Schmetzer there, and I may as well use this as a jumping off point. When the award ballots are either just came out or they're about to come out, I'm sure by the time this releases, they will be out. But Brian Schmetzer, to me, has probably done his best coaching job of his career. I don't necessarily know that. I know he's not going to be among the favorites to win Coach of the Year because it's really a narrative. It's a narrative-driven award. I think that's not controversial to say. It's usually about the team that overachieves the most or just has this record-breaking season. And Tata Martino is probably the odds-on favorite, right, to win the award. Yeah, I mean,
if they set the record, you have to give it to him.
Right.
If they don't, I think this becomes a conversation.
Right. Okay. So let's just say hypothetically they don't set the record. Where is Brian Schmetzer in that conversation in your mind?
Top 5 for me. Maybe top 6. I think you and I could probably, with Sounders fans, debate. I thought 16 was brilliant. I remember interviewing, you know what I mean? I just remember interviewing him. I think it was on SportsCenter right when he took the job. If I'm not mistaken, it was an away game at the Galaxy. And I remember going, well, how do you get in the playoffs? And he goes 8-2-4. And literally Seattle went 8-2-4. Yeah. And I was like, what is going on right now? And listen, they won MLS Cup. I don't care about that. What he did to change the narrative of that team, give that group belief. But this year's been good. I'm with you. I don't know if it's the best job he's done, but my God, it's top 2 or 3. This year's been good. And I'll tell you, he hasn't been typical Brian Schmetzer when you talk to him off camera, off mic, off the record. There's been moments where he's like, he's frustrated. He's not in a good place. He's trying to find answers, especially this LAFC. When they lost the Open Cup game, he's ready to lose his mind. And then they lose to Portland. He's like, how is this possible? And yet they could be the 2nd seed. Which is remarkable.
And I think that we're getting the same vibe. We talk to him on a pretty regular basis at training, and it's the same vibe. It's very, it's up and down. When it's up, it's sort of guarded, and he's not quite ready to pump his chest out and be excited. And I think part of it is because this season has been different kinds of challenges. He's had personnel challenges. He's had there's been obviously the results early on in the season were really, really rough. And then they didn't really hit their stride until the midpoint of the season. I mean, that first half of the season, even when the results started getting better, it was a grind.
He's out of contract, correct?
He is. Yeah, he is.
Which is amazing. So like you think about that often can be a detriment. That can be difficult. That could be a distracting
Absolutely.
factor. It has not been for him 100%.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting, Jeremiah. I didn't know 2021 he was a finalist for Coach of the Year with Bruce Arena and Robert Frazier that year. And I think that's interesting because I'm not sure I even would have had that in my.
No,
you know what I mean? I'm not sure I would have guessed that year.
No, I wouldn't have either. And I guess that was the year where they started off, 13 unbeaten or whatever it was. And I guess there was a little bit more attention around the team, but then they had that, they kind of slipped up they didn't win 5 winless at the end of the season.
Yes.
And sort of had a chance to get the top spot in the West on the last day of the season, and they tied Vancouver. But I wouldn't have guessed that one either. You're right. If you had to tell me,
he's never won, correct?
He's never won. I think I think 2021 may have been the only year he was even a finalist.
Which is remarkable because I'll tell you right now, then 16, they should have been like, what? Right?
Who won in 6? I don't even know who won in 16. I'm like
Oscar Pereira.
Oh, because they won Supporter Shield.
They won
and they had been bad before, right?
Yep. And I have a tendency to lean on, I'm okay with the Supporter Shield winner. I am. Unless
it's hard to go wrong with that
convincing. Right? If it's not a convincing Supporter Shield that goes down the last day, I think it opens up a can of worms. Bruce Arena in 2021, you set the record. If Tata Martino does so, you have to. I get that. But it's interesting because I ruffled some people's feathers. Jim Curtin won it in 2022, right?
Uh-huh.
I thought Wilfred Nancy should have won it that year. Of any year that he was going to win it, he was unbelievable in Montreal. That was an absurd season, and yet Jim Curtin won it in 2020. So I'm with you. There is a narrative part to that award that is interesting because it doesn't always follow the Supporter Shield, and I'm wondering why that does not.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me it either goes to, like I said, the Supporter Shield winner or the coach who led the team on what was perceived to be the most overperformance or whatever that may.
Right,
which
this year you would probably say Dean Smith at Charlotte, Chris Armas at Colorado.
Chris Armas at college. He seems to be getting a lot.
Right.
Yeah. Are there any Sounders that you think have a decent shot at an end of season award? To me, I think Yeimar has a pretty good shout for Defender of the Year.
Yeah, I think he's going to be in consideration for it. Absolutely. I'd be shocked if he's not. It's funny. It's kind of like Stefan Fry. Stefan Fry and Schmetzer really haven't gotten into this, right?
I think they're both hurt by consistency, that it's sort of like you take their performances for granted a little bit. Stefan Fry right now, he's leading the league, or he's one behind Hugo Lloris for shutouts, but he has a higher shutout percentage. He's the only goalkeeper under 1 goal per game. But the advanced analytics are not as kind to him this year. But it's been an easily overlooked year for Stefan Fry. I don't think I've heard anyone really talking about how good he's been. And yet you look at the end of season stats and here he is, near the top of everywhere.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is, having watched the last 4 Charlotte games, Colleen has been unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, Freeze and the Kalina to me are the odds-on favorites.
Yeah. To the point where, Jeremiah, it's kind of like Berkey. Where you're like, all right, fine. It's not about Seattle, but you'll appreciate this, and Sounders fans will. The newcomer of the year, it is head and shoulders Luis Suarez or Gabriel Peck versus anyone else.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And I think any other year, I find like we say this a lot with Stefan Fry. Any other year, I feel like we say that a lot.
Except for 18, where it was his award to win, and I still, to this day, lose my mind every time I look at Zach Steffen's performance that year and try to wrap my head around how he won Goalkeeper of the Year over Steffen.
I don't think a lot of people that voted on that award don't understand that, and yet somehow it turned out that way. I don't know.
Goalkeeper of the Year befuddles me more than any other award. I don't think that Albert Rusnak is a contender for MVP, but this has been I think a very impressive season for him.
Yes.
Is he? Do you think he's someone that maybe gets into the best 11 conversation?
Nope.
Yeah,
you're gonna laugh. I don't know. I don't even know if Evander gets in.
I'm not. I mean, I do find that funny.
I mean, think about it. He may be a finalist. If the only way they do this, so I went through this in my head. They'll pick 3 defenders. Okay.
Yeah,
goalies,
of course.
That's 4. 3 forwards. Great. Where's Messi listed? And I think Messi's going to be in the midfielders.
Probably.
Right? Now, all of a sudden, Messi's in the midfielders. Luciano Acosta's in the midfielders. Evander's in there. Ricky Pooch is in there. Now, all of a sudden, Jeremiah, you're
Gabriel
talking
Peck
about
is probably in there.
Someone's not going to get.
I know.
I'll be shocked if Peck makes it. So, anyways,
yeah,
Rusnak's had a great year for him. Contract year, if I'm not mistaken.
It is a contract year for him. Yeah.
But I don't think he makes best 11, and I just think it's a product of where the league is and the strength and the kind of seasons we've had with goal contributions. But you can make an argument he's the team MVP unequivocally.
Yeah, I think you can make that argument. You know, the thing that's been bandied about lately within the Sounders community is the idea of Nico. You know, you put Nico Lodero's best statistical season up against this Albert Rusnak season, and Rusnak's been better. Like, it's like he's got more goals than Lodero ever had. He's 1 short on assists of tying the franchise record for assists, but I think he has more primary assists than Lodero ever had.
He does.
And he is playing a role, a more defined role. He's not allowed to just go freelance and get the ball wherever he wants. Now, I think you can argue that Lodero came through in the biggest games and delivered the biggest hardware, and he was more of a traditional MVP of, if you pick an all-time Sounders MVP, I think you give that to Lodero. But on a statistical basis, I think it's been a little overlooked, even within the Sounders fan base, just how good Albert Rusnak his season has been this year.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
I agree. Now, here's where my rebuttal comes into play, and because I called a lot of those Lodero games. They were bigger moments.
I agree.
And so I think this year there have been some bad teams, and you could take advantage of it, right? And so, especially the West, if you think about it, San Jose, St. Louis, Sporting Kansas City, were not great teams. East have a few more mediocre teams, but the top 3 are better, whatever. You can look at it differently. I think Rusnak and I think Jordan Morris have taken advantage of some of those moments, but in the biggest moments, Rui Diaz and Lodero always delivered.
They did.
And they did. You know what I mean? However, the primary assist thing is the one thing that I think Rusnak should hold his hat on more than any of them, because that's literally coming from him.
Yeah, no, and I think especially on set piece delivery, he's been, I think, better than you can. I think you could just go set piece or set piece, and I think Lodero has been a better set piece taker or Rusnak has been a better set piece taker than Lodero really ever was. Which I agree. Which wasn't really his strong suit.
First off, I love Albert. I think he's an unbelievable player. I think if you are the top echelon of MLS, I think he's your number 1 non-designated player.
Well, that's a good. So that brings us to the big question this offseason, I think, is going to be: should the Sounders re-sign him as a D? Like everyone's going to say, well, if you can bring him back as not a DP, that's what you should do because that's the easy answer, right? If you can do it. But if you're the Sounders, if it's a matter of bringing him back or not bringing him back, do you give him the DP contract?
I do because it has to be a contract that I can manipulate in June or July. And that's when you should ask. I think Sounders fans need to look at that. Listen, you keep Rusnak on the team? Absolutely. Does it mean giving him a DP deal now? Okay. 6 months from now, Albert, I got to have the ability to buy that down. And if I can, great.
Do you I don't know how well you know Albert, but do you get the sense that he the type of player who, if you say to him, look, we promise if we give ourselves this flexibility that we're actually going to use it, does that make a difference to him? Does he go, look, I think I only want to win?
I think it does. First off, if he gets his money in whatever shape or fashion, it doesn't matter. You know, Jeremiah, most players, I'm not going to say all, listen, okay, fine. Whatever you got to do the salary cap, sure, as long as you use it, and which is what you just hit the nail on the head. Are you going to use it? Are you going to bring in 3 DPs and we're going to rock this thing? I'm in, all in. And I think he is the perfect player for that. I just do. But Seattle's got a lot of decisions to make.
And they do have a lot of decisions to make
this offseason. They've got some big ones, Jeremiah. It's going to be the most interesting offseason, I think, in a long time. It's fun from my perspective because I'm intrigued to see where ownership goes. I'm intrigued to see Schmetzer, and I would assume he comes back, but he's a free agent. Who knows? Someone may woo him off his feet, but I just don't leave Seattle.
All the signs we're seeing, at least from him, seem like it's funny because a few weeks ago, he was sort of, I don't want to talk about this. And he's still, I don't want to talk about it, but it's more of a, it'll get figured out. Kind of like there's a confidence as if he's gotten some assurances that things will work themselves out here.
I mean, he would have to turn in all of those footy pajamas that he has with Seattle Sounders.
He doesn't want to coach anywhere else. No, I think he and Adrian very much see eye to eye on how this is going to go. But you know, the biggest outside of Schmetzer, maybe the biggest offseason decision is they will have an open DP spot. I don't think it's breaking any news to say that Raul Ruidiaz is not going to come back as certainly as a DP. I don't think he'll be back in any way. But the big decision then is going to become what position do you sign this DP at? The Sounders have given every indication that they intend to at least try to sign a DP this winter. And I don't know. I look at the way that, you know, I know a few months ago they were internally pretty much laser focused on finding a 9. And they were, you know, there was even some discussion of trying to figure out a way to bring in a 9 this last summer. And in the intervening time since then, Jordan Morris has really, I think, come into his own as a number 9. You know, I think you and I were talking about this recently, and you mentioned this on the Timbers broadcast about, for all the numbers that he's putting up, he doesn't to you, or at the time, he didn't necessarily feel like a number 9 to you. And at least what I've seen, especially in this last stretch of games where, you know, he had the 2 goals against the Earthquakes, which were not his, those were more kind of like number 9 type of goals where they were clever in the box type of plays.
Yes.
And then he hasn't scored in the last 3 games, but he's contributed in very positive ways to scoring in each of the last 3 games, either through, you know, like he makes the goal against the Rapids, even though he doesn't finish that chance. And he definitely should have finished the chance that Rothrock set him up for, but he creates the chance that they do score on. You know, he was a contributor on the 2 of the goals they had against Vancouver. And then he helped out with the goal. He had the assist on the goal in the Houston game. Is he showing you that he can be a number 9, or do you still feel like if you're the Sounders, look, do your thing we love you, but you need to be a winger?
There's 2 first off, it's a great conversation, and good on Jordan for making it a conversation. Before I answer that, I'm going to remind your listeners of what I said in the first 4 weeks of the year when I did a couple of the games, if I'm not mistaken. And what I said was, I think it was the Galaxy game at the end of March. But either way, that's not the point. The point is, I said
Where
this
he missed
year's
a big chance at the end. Oh,
yes. Yep. And I said this year's important for Jordan Morris not to be streaky. And the best way that I've listened to my idol growing up was Alan Shearer, Ruud van Nistelrooy, players that I tried to watch and emulate in any shape or fashion that I could try to play that way. It was ridiculous for me to watch Thierry Henry because I could never play that way. Point being is that I've also gotten to know post-playing, and I've gotten to talk to Alan Shearer, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Michael Ballack, these people. I'm not name dropping, but I'm doing it for a purpose. And I said, how do you guys judge a 9? And they said 2 things. In Jeremiah, it's amazing. They said, not how many goals you score, it's how many games you score in. I think that's an amazing way to look at it. And their thought was, Ruud especially, well, if I score in 25 games, that may be 25 goals that are game deciders.
Mm-hmm.
But if the manager and my team know I'm going to score in 25 of my 35 appearances, it's different. And I was like, you know what? That's interesting. Never even thought of it that way. I just thought at the end of the year, did I score 15 goals? And then Alan Shearer would say, well, yeah, you scored 15 goals, but what if you had 3 hat tricks? That means 3 of the games were. So
right.
Anyways, I said this about Jordan Morris. And you guys know this for Sounders fans. He can go on streaks where there's no goal. He doesn't score. Then all of a sudden he gets hot and it's streaky. So he's very streaky both ways. If he wants to be a designated player 9 for a team that wants to win MLS Cup, he's got what, if I'm not mistaken, 13 goals on the year, correct?
In MLS, yeah.
In MLS play, right? So
yeah.
in the way I've always looked at it, now playing 34 games, that's got to be 18 games he's got to score in at the minimum.
Yeah,
and that's a designated player 9 that wants to win.
Yeah.
So we're only talking 6 teams here, 7 teams.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear you. I guess the counter argument that I would offer is that if you look at if you zoom out and you look at all the games that they've played, he has 17 goals across all competitions, which and I think that it counts that he's been healthy this year. He's going to play he's going to play in over 3,000 minutes. He'll have over 3,000 minutes across all comps. He'll set a career high for minutes played this year. He's been healthy. He'll play all the regular season games. He played in 2 of the Open Cup games.
Yep.
He played in all the Leagues Cup games. So I think availability counts for something. Is that fact that he's been able to play started a lot of 3-game weeks, which I think is huge for him. And he's been more consistent this year, especially as a 9. Those first 9 games of the season, he wasn't necessarily playing as a 9 too much. And then it really wasn't until that June 15th where they took Rui Diaz out of the lineup and they put Rothrock in. They essentially put Rothrock in that game, and that Morris has been able to start as a 9 consistently for the last half of the season, and he's had his most consistent run of scoring in a lot of games, not necessarily piling up goal after goal.
No, I agree with you. Now, if you ask Seattle, they'll tell you something different.
Oh, I know. There's doubts in the team.
But I'm saying those first 10 games that a lot of fans were like, Taylor, he didn't play as a 9. Listen, if you're not playing as a 9 and you're playing as a 9.5, or you're playing as a 4-4-2, you're playing as a 9, guys.
Yeah,
you're playing as a forward.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I just think.
I never give you my second point. What's João Paulo go? Like that's where this conversation turns into, right? So
yeah,
Jordan Morris and a new 6 that's younger. You know what I'm saying, Jeremiah? That's where this gets interesting. If it's only one DP that they can bring in at the moment, then yeah, you may say, well, listen, let's give Jordan another run, but let's get a little bit younger and fresher at that position, which, listen, I am the biggest João Paulo fan in the world. He's father's time staring him in the face. I've not seen the same João Paulo that I saw pre-injury.
And he's had a hard time staying healthy this year.
No.
Yeah. I think he's got a chronic hip issue that's continuing to cause problems for him. I think Christian Roldan has looked really good in that role. He's obviously he's a different player.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen him as really a number 6. Like, he's played in a double pivot but he's never really been asked to be the more defensive of the two double pivots. But he's looked,
he's always been the one that has to run. He's always been the fill in the gaps, run 5.5 miles, do this, do that, do everything to cover Ladero and everyone else running around. I think it's interesting. I still think, and I'll hold it to it. If Jordan Morris is my winger, they were really freaking good, man. When Rui Diaz was firing and Jordan's coming off that with his pace, he thinks like a center forward. So it's almost playing a second forward in a wide area, almost like a target winger. Sometimes you hear people describe it that way. I don't know. It's very interesting to me. I think it depends on who the 9 is and who the 6 is. I think they got to get young and dynamic, but Vargas, like I just look at the depth there.
Atencio.
Yeah, like I look at it and say, you know what? Give me let's roll the dice with it with a DP9. Let's do it.
And so how do you think Paul Rothrock figures into all this? I mean, he's been
I've rooted for him from the beginning, because when I asked Brian Schmetzer, tell me something about him, he looked me right in the eye and said, he's your kind of player. And I go, oh, what does that mean? He goes, he's a gamer. He just wants to win. Every single time he's on the field, whatever the competition is, he just wants to win. And there's something for that. Jackson Reagan's got a little bit of that too, doesn't he? So it's just, and I don't find it ironic. Those two grew up friends. They're doing everything. I think Paul's played himself into, 1, a contract, which is great, but 2, more importantly, a prominent role that Brian Schmetzer now looks at it. He looks down the bench, or he says, nah, I got to start him. He's got to play.
Well, and I think at the very least, he's put himself in a position where even if they bring in another player, it's very easy to turn to Paul and say, you're my first guy off the bench.
Well, you need depth, Jeremiah.
Right.
The best teams in this league have depth, and the ones that figure out depth the best, Columbus being one of those, Inter Miami. Yeah, absolutely. Paul coming off the bench, pushing the guy ahead of him. Yep. Good on Paul. Good on Paul, because I'm not sure he was given a full opportunity until now, and he's run with it.
No, it's been pointed out a few times that it's not completely unprecedented for a player of his age to sort of have an emergence. Not to draw too many broad comparisons, but Chris Wondolowski had a similar trajectory and turned out okay.
I mean, Wando didn't score a goal really until his 7th year.
Right. Yeah, it's
anything can happen. Absolutely.
It's been
I don't
really
think
interesting.
It'll be the same for the record, though.
No, I don't. Yeah, no, I'm not putting you there. Not putting you there.
No, but if it is, even better. It's great. It's awesome.
Do we make enough of the narrative that the degree to which the Sounders still have so much Seattle DNA? You know, you look at Rothrock, you look at Reagan, who aren't even technically homegrown players, but they did grow up in Seattle. They did play in the academy. But you look at this team and, you know, we talk about Dallas, we talk about Philly, and they've sold players on, and I guess that's sort of what adds to that aura. But the Sounders have so much more. So much more of their team comes from within. You know, Max and Dunny have talked about this a fair amount on the broadcast. But is that something that needs to be? We need to do a better job of promoting that story.
Yes. Yep. Just because that wasn't always the case. You and I both know that. You live there. Yeah, I mean, that was never the case. So it's been a great progression. You know, how often would Garth talk about it publicly, being like, we've got to get younger. We've got to use the academy. We've got to do that. They're now doing that. Schmetzer's using the players and moments for those players to succeed. So, yes, absolutely. I don't think it has the same narrative of Dallas and Philly just because they've been doing it longer. But I'd argue
they've sold players for more money. That's the big part of it.
Even Philly, if it not for Aronson and now Sullivan, Jim Curtin be the first person going, like, we have a great academy, but at some point we got to move these players on.
Right.
The Red Bulls have kind of died down, right? Other than Tyler Adams and Josie Altidore years ago, they really haven't sold, and that was an academy that everybody talked about. I think Seattle deserves the narrative. I think it should be talked about more. I do.
Well, before I let you go, I did want to pick your brain a little bit about some of the national stuff that's going on. The biggest news right now is Greg Berhalter over at Chicago. Just got hired. He's going to be the GM and the coach. I know there's a popular idea that, it's kind of the success of this will depend on who he hires to be sort of the player personnel person. But isn't that an inherent flaw in the system that that person will report to him and then
they still report to him? He hired him, he's paying him, and then they report to him. So listen, and I've said this to Greg, so it's not like it's anything. I just don't think it's possible. And I get I just think nowadays this league has grown in so many different ways. The complexity of being the sporting director along with the coach is not what it was. And everyone will say Bruce Arena 2021. Well, where are they after that? That roster's a disaster. And now it's got to be fixed because they had to rehire Caleb Porter, and Caleb wants a completely different roster. Now you got Kurt Onofo, Chris Tierney saying, well, that's what Bruce did. Now this is what we want to do. You see what I'm saying? Peter Vermees is another example. The other aspect that nobody talks about is the guy that's negotiating your contract is also the guy that's coaching you during the 90 minutes. And when that guy says to you, you don't get a raise, you now want me to run through the wall for you the next day? No, it just doesn't work that way. Jeremiah, it's not going to work that way. And I don't think I know Greg knows that, but I don't know if Greg fully understands where the league is and how much money these players are now starting to make versus 5 years ago.
Well, I wonder if he underestimates how much the league has really changed internally. Like not just a talent level, but it's a very different league than it was in 2018, 2017.
Jeremiah, the other way to do this, ask Steve Cherundolo if he wants to do that. I have. He says no. Ask Pat Noonan. No chance. Ask Jim Curtin. No, thank you. Ask Schmetzer. He'd be like, nope.
Right.
Like it is the sporting director job now is way more complex than it was when Greg Berhalter left MLS.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the other hand, we're talking about Chicago. So in and of itself, it's a positive hire.
Yeah. I guess the thing that I find funny about the Chicago hire is that everyone says that Joe Mansueto is doing the right things in terms of he's putting the faith in the guys that he hired to do the job. But the flaw seems to be consistently he puts too much faith in the wrong people.
Yeah.
And this is sort of that same kind of process, right? He's putting too much faith in one guy.
To your point, he's gone away from the first model that he had and moving on from the other guys, but now he's going to an older model.
Right.
Where you're like, well, wait a minute, hang on a minute. On the other hand, Joe, if he was on this podcast, would say it was the only way for me to get Greg Berhalter.
Right.
So then you're like, okay, I get it. Listen, he is spending money. He is doing everything he can to get Chicago back on the map. He will get them on the map. I think from the national analyst mind that I have right now, we have to have Chicago on the map. This league was so good and strong when Chicago was who they were. They need to get back on the map. And so I hope Joe's rewarded for his ambition in spending money. I just think Greg's going to find it a little bit more difficult than he thinks in the moment.
Well, Taylor, I've kept you for long enough. I really appreciate you giving us the time. So you said you're on a MLS season pass, obviously, but you're not calling either of the games this weekend, are you?
Nope. I got the weekend off, so I'll be coaching the second grade girls here in Massachusetts.
Okay.
Good luck to them. Good luck to the parents. They have no idea what they're getting with me this weekend. Is it weird if I bring a cooler of beer for the 9 a.m. kickoff?
No, I think that's tolerable. I think.
If I'm arrested this weekend, you know what happened.
Right. Do the other parents know who you are? Do you get a lot of, do you know what you're doing?
I am my daughter's dad. That's all I am. That's all it is. And then if I yell, what are we doing? Everyone's head goes. I'm like, oh shit, I just gave it away. Good seeing you, dude.
Good seeing you. Obviously, thank you for coming on, Taylor. I am Jeremiah Shan, signing off for No Sadietis, and we will catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one.